Well, hello and welcome to another in the series of Café Insights. I'm Andrew Vine, Managing Director of the Insight Bureau, and today I'm in conversation with Dr Yuwa Hedrick-Wong. How are you?
Very well, thank you.
Good to see you again. Yuwa is a global economist and business strategist. In fact, he's the Chief Economist and Chair of the Academic Advisory Council at Mastercard. Welcome back to Singapore.
Thank you very much.
In fact, you're going to be quite a regular visitor next year.
Indeed, I will be.
Yeah, yes. Having just been appointed as a senior fellow at the Kwan School of Public Policy, which is the National University of Singapore.
Yes.
Congratulations on that.
Thank you very much.
One of the things I really wanted to take the opportunity to ask you today, because it's big topic of conversation, is global trade and the trade war with China that Donald Trump seems to be hell-bent on pursuing. But before we do that, I always like to take a quick check on the state of the world economy. I trust you to give me a straight answer on this. We seem to be doing okay. You know, the US economy is doing okay, Europe as well, and Asia.
The operative word, Andrew, that you said is it seems to be.
Okay.
Well, what's going on in the US is that you had a very long and slow and in fact anemic recovery since 2008-2009. And just as the economy is gathering strength, slowly we saw unemployment rate dropping down. Today is more or less, at full employment.
Right.
But it's right at this sort of upturn cycle that Donald Trump decided to pump this massive fiscal stimulus into the economy. It's as pro-cyclical as you can get. So that's why all the vital signs are great when you have such an amount of stimulus in the last 2 years, both with the tax cuts, right, and then increased military spending, and now increased subsidies to all sorts of industries that is perceived to be affected by his tariffs. So the American fiscal deficit is going to double in the next few years.
Wow. And
then with this such a post-cyclical spending, the whole thing is going to collapse. It's not sustainable. It's like the wrong timing, the wrong thing to do, the wrong sector to focus on. It's all wrong. But in the short term, it's looking just fantastic.
So there's only one way the US economy should be looking, which is very strong because of these reasons.
Completely, yes.
What about Europe?
Well, Europe, sadly, is that I think the center being Germany and to a lesser extent France, is not holding. Merkel, her position is seriously eroded. In fact, I think she's basically struggling to stay in power at this point. Yeah. So there's no chance of any kind of bold action and take decisions and tackle difficult reforms to make Europe more sustainable. Sadly, one of the side effects is that Europe is in no position to make concessions to the UK.
As it's racing towards March next year when Brexit is supposed to happen.
Precisely. So I would argue that the centre is folding, and with the strongest leader in the Eurozone becoming inward-looking, which is the exact opposite of what they should be doing. And then, of course, when the centre is folding, that's when the fringes come alive, the populist, the far right, and so on. It's going to be quite chaotic, I think.
Okay. And now racing across the world to Asia?
Well, I think Asia is the opposite. Quietly, without much media fanfare, my argument is that Asia is becoming the most economically integrated region in the world. This is a crude but useful indicator is to look at the percentage of trade that is transacted within the region. Asia is now number 2 in the world, second only to the Eurozone. And this is achieved without a pan-regional free trade agreement of any kind.
Right.
So, in fact, our intra-regional trade as a percentage of total is higher than NAFTA, than North America, free trade zone. So, all kinds of neat development in terms of supply chains is drawing in both the really, really high-income countries, Japan, South Korea, Singapore, with the very low-income countries like Laos, Myanmar, and others.
And I think it's fair to say that the Asia story was largely a China story for a long while, and will always be. Yes. But we also have ASEAN developing very strongly now.
ASEAN is, I think, taking the lead in pushing for regional economic integration. And increasingly, ASEAN, I think, is becoming a lot more synergistic with Northeast Asia. Think about Northeast Asia as a region with an aging population, but with surplus savings. So what do they need? Well, they need to put the surplus savings to work to earn enough to meet the pension liabilities of the aging population. So the way to put that money to work is not at home, but in ASEAN. Right? So you have a very mutually beneficial, synergistic relationship being developed, and it's very good for the region.
The topic of the day I want to focus on now is the trade war issues with Donald Trump. I mean, first of all, the first question, I guess, is why is this even happening? I mean, what is Donald Trump thinking? Well, what is his thoughts behind taking this type of initiative?
Donald Trump, along with his core supporters, have never believed international trade is beneficial to America. And America being the largest economy in the world, being the leader of the free world, as it were, for so long, and literally the champion of the liberal economic order, has been ripped off by the others. So the rest of the world are free riders. That's what they believe in. So any kind of rules-based international system that treats America as one of the many is wrong. And that's so Donald Trump's agenda is to create bilateral relations in the way that he believes could benefit America. Case by case, let's make a deal. So that's what he's pushing the world into.
Yeah. But when you talk about globalization, that hasn't benefited everyone, and this is one of the things he's latching on to, isn't it?
Yes, absolutely correct. And what we often pay insufficient attention to is how globalization and technology have interacted in the last few decades to the disadvantage of specific segments of workers in high-income countries. Manufacturing is a case in point.
Yes.
Back in the 1970s, a quarter of all jobs in the United States is manufacturing. And in the 70s up to the early 1980s, a job in manufacturing is for an American with a high school education or less to earn a middle-class income. It's literally almost the only option. The second one is driving a truck. Okay? And with the decline of manufacturing employment at that speed on such a scale, you can imagine. We have left out a whole chunk of workers, literally out in the cold.
Yeah. So, if this carries on and keeps escalating as it seems to be right now, what can we expect in terms of the effect on the global economy? I mean, what are we going to see shake out?
Well, we're going to see organization. Okay? We're going to see the U.S. increasingly absent in the international systems of trade, as we have understood it. And regional integration will take place. And again, earlier I mentioned about Asia, and that's going to continue. You see the global supply chain supported by rapidly advancing technology to change how we produce things.
Yeah.
Right? So Donald Trump's paradigm is still very much a country-based production story. Right? You have a country that can produce ABC, and then another country that produces XYZ, and they trade.
Yeah.
The problem today for people like Donald Trump is that by the time a product is made, it's probably traded about 27 times between 10 countries or more. So that's the supply chain that literally taps into the smallest bit of comparative advantage and leverage it, okay, for greater efficiency. So other countries will get increasingly involved in this intertwining of the and deeper supply chains between countries. And the US will continue to be left out.
Is this going to knock whole percentages off global GDP? Or is it just a redistribution, do you think?
Well, in the short term, you see all the econometric models that I look at about the impact of the trade war, there's a strong consensus among them that the impact is minimal. But I think that's wrong, because what the models fail to take into account is the impact via deepening uncertainty and investment sentiment.
Yeah.
These are not captured by the models. And I think they can do untold damage, seriously increase the volatility, I think, of the global economy.
Is part of this also Donald accusing China as being a currency manipulator? The first thing he said he was going to do when he took power was to take issue with this.
Right. Well, his primary economic advisors actually believe that China is far more than just a currency manipulator. The entire system of China's production is unacceptable. And that's why you have a situation where Trump seems to be at least open to some kind of a compromise with Europe, with Mexico, with Japan and so on, but not with China. Because the issue with China is it's not simply the issue of trade deficit. China actually is the only country in the world today that can challenge the US in terms of global dominance. And that's the deep issue for Donald Trump, is how do you stop China's rise, is I think as deep as that.
We kind of seen this before, haven't we? If we think back to the 1980s, America was trying to stop Japan.
Well, or at least try to mitigate Japan's chronic trade surpluses against the US. Yeah. And of course, Japan basically caved in, accepted the so-called voluntary restraint on car export, and then when that did not work, agreed to the Plaza Accord to basically engineer tremendous appreciation of the Japanese yen against the US dollars. Now, talking about currency manipulation, that's the currency manipulation of the century, let me tell you. But the point is that it did not work. Japan continued to run trade surpluses against the US, in spite of the voluntary restraint on export, in spite of the appreciation of currency.
And so China will be watching this as well, thinking the same thing.
There's absolutely no way China will follow Japan's path.
And then talking of China then, so obviously the big question is going to be, how is China responding and how will it respond? Or are there things domestically in China that is going to prevent it from escalating the response?
Well, China's response is essentially they're going to fight it out with the US and they believe they can win. And it's interesting in the sense that China is already in the process, before the trade war, was already in the process of upgrading its production, de-risking its dependency on export, and encourage stronger domestic demand, both in consumption and investment. So I think what Donald Trump is doing is actually accelerating China's movement in that direction. In other words, making China stronger faster and less dependent on the US.
And although China's economy is slowing, we shouldn't interpret that as being a negative at all, should we?
No, I think it's natural. Yeah. China's per capita GDP at about $10,000 now is totally natural and desirable growth to come down to about the 6% range. So I think within China's policy circle, the debate has been how do we substitute quality for quantity in terms of economic growth. And I think that's what they're getting. Yeah. So increasingly, better jobs are being created, higher value added is built into the production process, and there's much stronger emphasis today on the quality of life, on environment, for instance. So this headlong rush just to grow and create jobs is very much a thing of the past. And in so doing, China will become less and less dependent, low value added, labor-intensive export. And also focusing on the level of economic growth of China today, people are sort of being alarmed, at 6%, oh my God, right? It's completely wrong-headed. If you go back to 2010, at 10% GDP growth versus 6% today, and you look at how much is being added in the economy, at 6%, China is adding more, in fact double, what it added to the economy at 10% in 2010.
Yuwa, it's a great pleasure to see you again. Thank you very much for answering my questions today, and we'll see a lot more of you next